I stood there, my fingers trembling around the cane as Mark's words slithered through the air. Why don't you just die and let us live peacefully? His voice was harsh, but it wasn't the anger that cut the deepest. It was the betrayal. My own son, the one I had nurtured and loved, had just tried to break me. And in that moment, I vowed to take back every piece of peace he thought he could steal from me. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The Grant dining room glowed with the gentle amber of chandelier light, casting elegant shadows on the worn floral wallpaper Evelyn had chosen decades ago. The long oak table, polished to a mirror sheen, sat dressed in crisp linen, vintage silver, and roast chicken carved just so, flanked by cornbread, mashed potatoes, and her famous green bean casserole. The scent of rosemary and butter floated warmly through the air, almost disguising the tension thickening beneath it. Evelyn sat at the head of the table, her back straight, napkin in her lap, her movements composed and practiced. Across from her, Mark shoveled food into his mouth with a kind of impatient energy, his jaw working harder than necessary. Laura, neat in her soft cream sweater, twirled her wine glass slowly between two fingers, eyes scanning the room as if she were waiting for a camera crew to arrive. I made the peach cobbler you like, Evelyn offered softly, her voice lined with the kind of grace only time could teach. Mark didn't look up. You made it last week, too. Evelyn's hand paused, resting lightly on her fork. Well, I remembered you finished the whole dish then. A breath passed. Laura's smile was paper thin. He's been cutting back on sugar. Evelyn nodded, her expression unreadable. How mindful of him. The rest of dinner passed in taut silence, filled only by the clink of utensils and the occasional sigh from Mark. The air conditioning hummed low overhead, drowning out the distant chirp of evening crickets outside. Evelyn tried to ignore the gnawing presence of something unsaid building like static in the room. After clearing the plates, she returned from the kitchen with a pot of coffee, only to find Mark standing stiffly by the French doors, looking out into the garden as if it offended him. He didn't turn as she approached, still keeping this museum of a house at 68 degrees like a damn crypt. I like it cool, Evelyn said, gently setting down the tray. Mark turned then, quick, sharp, and reached out before she could move. His hand gripped her arm, hard. She blinked at him, the pain immediate but quiet behind her eyes. He leaned in, close enough that she could smell the trace of bourbon under his cologne. His voice came low, teeth tight. Why don't you just die and let us live peacefully? The words weren't shouted. That would have been easier. They were whispered, deliberate, intimate, venomous. For a moment, the chandelier flickered, or maybe her vision did. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her gaze locked onto his, eyes steel behind the gentleness she wore like armor. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her free hand came up slow and firm, prying his fingers from her arm one by one. She stepped back, steady on her feet, and walked past him as though he hadn't said a word. At the table, Laura lifted her wine glass, without meeting Evelyn's eyes. He's just tired, she murmured, the wine swirling like blood in water. Don't take it personally. Evelyn looked at her daughter-in-law, then at the half-empty bottle resting like a lazy accusation between them. She said nothing. She didn't return to the table. Instead, she moved through the house in silence, her cane echoing softly on the hardwood, until she stepped out onto the back porch. The night wrapped around her shoulders like a familiar shawl. Cool, quiet, and full of things unspoken. The garden stretched out before her in moonlight. Neatly trimmed hedges, the wind rustling the last of the summer leaves. The swing at the far end of the lawn, her husband had built it for Mark when he was 10, creaked faintly in the breeze. It used to be joy, now it was memory. She stared into the dark, not blinking. A screen door creaked open behind her. I saw his hand, Donna said, her voice low and matter-of-fact. She stepped beside Evelyn and leaned against the railing, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Left bruises, didn't it? Evelyn didn't look at her. He said I was in the way. That I should die. Donna exhaled. You gonna let that pass? Evelyn finally turned to her, her eyes darker than the night surrounding them. No, she said, voice calm. I'm going to make sure he remembers those words every time he tries to sleep. Donna looked over sharply, the unspoken question caught in her throat, right as Evelyn, without breaking eye contact, lifted her phone and began dialing. The house was still, that old kind of still, the kind that only settled in once everyone with bad intentions had left. Evelyn's footsteps echoed in the hallway as she moved toward the study, deliberate, measured, her cane thudding softly against the oak floors like a metronome counting down something irreversible. Donna followed behind her, silent but present, knowing better than to offer comfort. Comfort wasn't needed. Witnesses were. Evelyn reached the end of the hallway and stopped before the carved cherrywood door. She turned the brass knob with care and stepped into the room that once belonged to order, memory, and ink. Inside, the study smelled faintly of old books and polished leather. Sunlight during the day usually warmed the shelves and carpets, but at night, like now, it felt colder, almost like stepping into a vault. She crossed to the far wall, where a framed painting of the James River hung just off-center. With a push of her hand, the painting swung open on a quiet hinge, revealing a recessed wall safe. The keypad blinked green as she entered the code, the year she retired. A soft click, and the door released. Inside sat one item, a heavy black leather estate binder. The spine was worn, but the silver-embossed name, Evelyn M. Grant, still shone under the lamplight like a final word. Evelyn took it out carefully, as though it might shatter, and carried it to the desk. She opened the binder, her fingers trembling not from age but from something older than anger, something ancient, disappointment. Mark's name stared back at her from the first page. Full legal heir, primary beneficiary, next of kin. Laura's name followed, carefully listed under a column labeled secondary. Every page after, deeds, investment portfolios, savings account ledgers, even the title to the house, read like a biography of her life's work. All of it once earmarked for them. Evelyn's jaw tensed. Donna stood behind her, arms crossed. Her voice came quiet. You're holding their peace right there. Evelyn's eyes didn't lift. Not for much longer. She flipped the next few pages, skimming through the bond portfolio, stable, predictable, and the property appraisal from last spring, which placed her house's value higher than she remembered. Every document was pristine, notarized, and meticulously indexed. Every line, leverage. She paused at a yellow post-it stuck between two legal-sized documents. In her own handwriting, review annually. Keep control. For the first time that night, Evelyn let out a dry, humorless laugh. She closed the binder slowly and sat back in the leather chair. Her fingers tapped once on the cover before reaching for her phone. Donna tilted her head. You calling Howard? Evelyn nodded, dialing without hesitation. It's time I make this house match the person I've become. The phone rang once, twice. A sleepy voice answered, gravelly and alert all at once. Evelyn? Everything okay? She didn't hesitate. I need you to come by in the morning. Bring your cleanest red pen. A brief pause. Then, understood. She ended the call and set the phone beside the binder like it was a loaded weapon. Donna came around to the front of the desk, her brow knit. You really gonna do this? Evelyn looked up, and for a flicker of a moment, she looked not 74, not tired, not polite, just exacting, precise, dangerous. I'm not just going to do it, she said. I'm going to make sure it's done with the kind of permanence that leaves nothing for them to twist. A silence followed, long and heavy. Donna finally sat down across from her, the room darker now, the only light coming from the small green desk lamp between them. Evelyn opened the binder once more and removed one page. It was the deed to the house. She slid it across to Donna without speaking, as if to say, "Look closely. This is the battlefield." Donna looked down at the page, then back at her friend. "Then I guess it starts here." Evelyn's fingers reached into the drawer, pulled out a small velvet pouch, and set it on top of the binder. It jingled, metal on metal. The screen of her phone lit up again. Howard Blake. Incoming message. She opened it. Understood. Red pen ready. Let's cut out the rot. Evelyn smiled faintly and then reached for her fountain pen. By mid-morning, Richmond's September sun filtered through the tall windows of Evelyn's study, splashing gold over the leather armchairs and glinting off the spine of the estate binder. The house felt unnaturally quiet, as if even the walls were holding their breath. Howard Blake stood by the desk, glasses low on his nose, flipping through the original documents Evelyn had laid out. He looked like a surgeon prepping for an operation, precise, sterile, and entirely uninterested in bedside manner. "You kept everything in perfect order," he muttered, running a finger down a page. "Indexed, labeled, notarized." I've seen bank vaults with worse record-keeping. Evelyn sat opposite him, legs crossed neatly at the ankle, wearing a slate gray sweater and her late husband's wristwatch, one of the few things Mark hadn't already tried to claim. She watched Howard flip a page, strike his name, and hers. He didn't look up. Understood. The red pen clicked. Ink met paper. Line by line, Mark's name vanished, first from the primary heir designation, then from the trust clauses, then from the survivorship clauses Evelyn had once added after her stroke. Back when fear had made her merciful, Laura's name followed, disappearing from the secondary designation like smoke from a blown-out candle. Howard paused only once, pen hovering. "You sure about the house?" "You could assign it to a foundation and keep Donna's name separate." Evelyn shook her head once. "No half measures, no loopholes. I want every inch of my life to go towards something better than them." He nodded, and the pen moved again, striking out the last legal breath either of them would ever take from her. Donna, quiet in the corner, looked up from her knitting, thick yarn sliding through her fingers like tension made tangible. "You've got a plan for all that peace you're taking back?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Scholarships for first-generation teachers, full ride, room, board, books. They'll sign a commitment to teach public school for 5 years after graduation." Howard's eyebrows lifted. "Ambitious. It was my job to believe in futures. Why stop now?" Howard flipped to the asset appendices. "What about the liquid accounts?" "A trust for Donna's grandkids. Education, housing, no restrictions on use, but no access until 25. Donna blinked, her fingers freezing around her knitting needles. "Evelyn, that's—" Evelyn raised a hand gently. "No speeches. This is me taking back control. Not charity, not pity. Just—" "Correction," Howard tapped the desk softly. "You're creating a wall no one can scale. No contest, no claim, no standing." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "That's the point. I want it airtight. I want the paper to feel like concrete when he tries to scratch at it." He removed his glasses and met her gaze. "This is airtight. Not even a whisper will get through." For the first time since that Sunday night, Evelyn exhaled, slow, deep, controlled. She reached into the binder and took out the page that used to declare Mark her beloved son and sole heir. She folded it neatly in half, then again, and dropped it into the small brass fireplace bin beside her desk. She didn't bother lighting it. Some things deserved to rot slowly. Howard organized the new will into a fresh binder, navy blue, crisp, embossed in gold. Evelyn M. Grant, Living Will and Estate Trust. He placed it gently in front of her. "Sign here." Then again on the final page, Evelyn picked up her fountain pen, the same one she'd used to grade final essays for 30 years. It still wrote like it had something to prove. With steady strokes, she signed her name. And with that, Mark Grant became a ghost to her legacy. As Howard packed up, he handed her 2 certified copies. One goes in your safe, one with me. I'll file notice with the clerk's office tomorrow. Donna stood slowly. Feels like we buried someone. Evelyn glanced at the fireplace bin. We did, but no headstone. She watched Howard leave, then turned to the window overlooking the front lawn. A black luxury SUV pulled into her driveway. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Mark stepped out, alone, hands in his pockets. No smile, no shame, just purpose. And she was already walking toward the front door before he made it up the steps. The late morning sun bathed Richmond's downtown in a golden haze as Evelyn and Howard stood outside the county clerk's office. The building was old, its exterior cracked in places, the windows tinted just enough to obscure what was happening inside. It smelled like paper and formality, thick with history and bureaucracy. Evelyn adjusted the grip on her cane and looked down at the paperwork in her hands. The city was just beginning to awaken, its streets alive with the hum of cars and the distant chatter of office workers on lunch breaks. But she felt detached from it, like she was floating above the chaos, moving with a cold precision she hadn't felt in years. Inside, the clerk's office was small and well-worn, linoleum floors, filing cabinets stacked to the ceiling, and a woman behind a counter who looked like she'd seen it all. She looked up, slow and disinterested, before greeting them with the perfunctory smile of someone who had no time for anything except routine. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat, like it belonged to someone in another era. Howard stepped forward, placing the thick file on the counter. "We need to inquire about a title change, specifically the Grant estate." The clerk glanced at the file, then at Evelyn, her eyes sharpening slightly. "The Grant estate. Let me check." She pulled up a screen on her computer and began typing, the sound of the keyboard echoing in the quiet space. Evelyn shifted, her gaze fixed on the woman's hands. The last few days had felt like an endless uncoiling, like she was slowly pulling a thread from a tangled knot she'd inherited. Mark had made the first cut. Now it was her turn to slice cleanly through the mess. The clerk's fingers stopped typing, and the sharp click of the mouse signaled the end of her search. She looked up. "Seems like there's been an update," the clerk said, tapping the screen. "Mark Grant has listed himself as co-manager of the Grant estate." Evelyn's blood went cold. She kept her face neutral, but inside, something deep and steady churned. Anger, frustration, a quiet, burning resolve. She hadn't expected this, not in the least. It wasn't just an oversight. It was a deliberate move to stake a claim, to position himself before she could respond. "Is that legal?" Howard asked, his voice level but tight with the kind of control Evelyn had come to trust. The clerk frowned slightly. "Not really. There's no official document filed to validate it, but it's visible in the system. If anyone were to search, they'd see his name alongside yours." She looked at Evelyn, adding with a touch of sympathy, "You may want to get that removed." Evelyn met her eyes. "I'll do that." Howard stepped forward, his tone brisk, professional. "Please pull the necessary documents. We'll be removing his name today." The clerk hesitated, looking at Evelyn and then back to her screen. "It'll take a few minutes, but I understand." She turned and disappeared behind the curtains of a back office, her shoes clicking on the tiles. Evelyn's hand tightened around her cane. "That bastard," she muttered under her breath, her gaze still locked on the back office. "Mark thinks he can control me with paperwork, but he's only playing the game I already know." Donna, who had followed them into the office quietly, stepped closer to Evelyn. "He's burying you alive on paper, you know, trying to make himself indispensable, even when it's nothing more than a power grab." Evelyn nodded, the muscles in her jaw tight. "This is just the beginning. Paper doesn't define who owns this house, who controls this life, but I'll make sure it defines who doesn't." Howard returned, documents in hand, and handed them to the clerk. She didn't speak again as she processed the removal of Mark's name, the rustle of papers filling the silence. It was methodical, like cutting away the rot of something that had been allowed to fester too long. Evelyn looked out the window, watching the steady stream of cars and people pass. She was already thinking 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about revoking titles. It was about taking back what was rightfully hers. No more shadows, no more secrets. She would burn every bridge Mark had built. The clerk returned, handing her a fresh document, official, stamped, signed. Everything's in order. The co-manager title is officially revoked. Evelyn took the paper, her fingers brushing over the embossed seal. "Thank you," she said coolly, taking the document and tucking it carefully into her bag. "Just paperwork," Laura had said in her smooth, dismissive voice. "It'll all blow over." But Evelyn felt the weight of the paper in her hands. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a declaration. And as they left the office, Evelyn paused, glancing up at the city skyline in the distance. A shadow moved across the street, Mark standing across the road in a dark suit, his hands in his pockets, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. Evelyn didn't flinch. She just smiled. The bank's lobby was sleek, polished marble floors, steel pillars, and the sharp scent of clean air and overcompensated power. Evelyn stepped through the automatic doors with her cane clicking sharply on the floor, each step deliberate. Howard was a step behind her, his briefcase swinging by his side, his presence like a cold shadow in the sterile space. She had a sense of inevitability now, like the universe had tilted and this was where it all was headed. Mark's games, his manipulation, his quiet but steady push to control, had gone too far. She wouldn't play by his rules anymore, not anymore. At the counter, an officer greeted them with a practiced smile, but Evelyn's eyes saw beyond the pleasant exterior, focusing on the cold precision of the situation. "How can I help you today?" "I'm here to speak about a loan application," Evelyn said, her voice calm but firm. A loan Mark Grant attempted to secure against the Grant estate. The officer blinked, visibly taken aback. "Oh, yes, of course." She shuffled through some paperwork behind the desk and pulled up a file on the screen. "We've received some unusual paperwork, application for a substantial loan, with the Grant estate as collateral." Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest, the calmness of her exterior barely masking the slow-burning fury within. She wasn't sure what shocked her more, the audacity of Mark's actions or the fact that she had known, deep down, that he was getting ready to make a move like this. He had always been about the easy way out. Howard leaned in, his voice low. "We need the details." Now. The officer clicked through the pages, and the document appeared on the screen in front of them. "Here it is," she said. "It looks like Mr. Grant has applied for a loan in the amount of $500,000, secured by the estate. It mentions that the property transfer is imminent." Evelyn froze, her hand gripping her cane so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What does that mean, imminent?" Her voice was sharp, colder now. The officer shrugged. "It's not entirely clear, but it's indicative of the fact that he plans to transfer ownership soon. The application suggests an immediate transfer of equity." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, the air around her still. She could feel the blood rushing in her ears, her thoughts racing to catch up with the implications. Mark had tried to secure a loan on the house, her house, using a promise of imminent ownership, a move that would have drained her estate, putting it all under his control. Howard spoke up, his tone clipped, professional. "Freeze the estate's equity. Do it immediately. No transactions, no transfers. I'll file the fraud alert across all institutions." The officer looked at him, wide-eyed, and nodded quickly. "Understood. We'll flag the account right away." Evelyn could see the officer moving quickly behind the desk, typing furiously into the computer, but her thoughts were already elsewhere, on Mark and what this meant. He had been lying in wait, testing her. He thought he could take what was hers with the stroke of a pen and the push of a button. And now he had overplayed his hand. Donna, who had been standing quietly beside her, spoke in a low voice, her words cutting through the heavy silence of the bank. "He's financing peace with your pulse, Evelyn. He thinks that if he can suffocate you financially, He'll bleed you dry, make you a ghost in your own life. Evelyn nodded slowly, her eyes narrowed. Donna was right. It was all part of Mark's game. A game she had no intention of playing by his rules anymore. I'm done letting him think he can control me, Evelyn said, her voice steady but colder than before. I'll make sure that loan never sees the light of day. I'll make sure everything he's done, every lie he's told, is laid bare for everyone to see. Howard finished the paperwork with the bank officer and turned to Evelyn. It's done. The freeze is in place. Evelyn's gaze never wavered from the officer who stood before them, her hands shaking ever so slightly as she processed the documents. Good, Evelyn said, her eyes steely, burning with the quiet fury of someone who had been pushed too far. As they turned to leave, Evelyn felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. Mark may have thought he was controlling the game, but the truth was, he was a pawn in hers. Every move he made would be met with a counter, and every lie would be exposed. There was no peace to be found in her pulse, only justice. As they stepped out of the bank and onto the sidewalk, a black car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down slowly, and Mark's face appeared, his eyes hard and unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her with that same calculating gaze. It was the look of someone who believed they were still in control. Evelyn stared back, a faint smile curving her lips. Your move, she whispered. The car pulled away, but this time she knew the game had changed. The quiet of the library was heavy, weighted by years of silence and the looming shadows that crept across the room as evening descended. The old mahogany shelves, lined with leather-bound books and delicate antiques, had witnessed more than Evelyn could ever put into words. It had been her sanctuary, the place where she pored over lesson plans, essays, and dreams. Now it would become the place where she fought back. Evelyn moved slowly but with purpose. The camera sat on a tripod in front of her desk, positioned to catch the sharp angles of her face, the way the light from the tall windows cast her features in soft relief. There was no room for emotion here, only strategy, clarity, and resolve. She looked into the lens as if she were facing Mark directly, knowing full well this video would reach places he couldn't control. She glanced at Donna, standing in the corner by the window, arms folded across her chest. Donna had been with her through all of this, the quiet observer, the one who saw the small shifts and the grand moves alike. Today she was more than that. She was witness. Ready? Evelyn's voice was steady, but her eyes were a sharp storm, containing all the fury she had yet to unleash. Donna nodded once, her eyes softening. Whenever you are. Evelyn took a deep breath and adjusted the chair, sitting tall, straightening her shoulders as if she were preparing to address a classroom. Except this time, her audience was Mark. The stakes were personal. The stakes were her life's work, her peace, her legacy. She pressed record on the camera. The soft whir of the lens focusing was the only sound in the room for a moment, before Evelyn's voice broke the stillness. This is Evelyn M. Grant, recording this statement in my library on the evening of September 10th, 2025. I am of sound mind, and I make this recording voluntarily. She paused, adjusting her position slightly, letting the weight of the moment settle over her like a thick fog. She wasn't just speaking to the camera, she was speaking to every decision, every betrayal, every moment of manipulation Mark had tried to use against her. She continued, her words clear and precise. This video serves as a formal statement regarding the current state of my estate and the actions I'm taking to protect it from fraudulent claims. I state unequivocally, entitlement is not inheritance. She let those words hang in the air, heavy with finality. Her gaze, sharp and unyielding, never wavered from the camera lens. Evelyn flicked a page from a folder on her desk and looked at the documents, then back to the camera. Mark Grant, my son, has already made attempts to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. He has attempted to secure a loan, using my estate as collateral. He has listed himself as a co-manager of the Grant estate, and he has engaged in fraudulent activity to bypass my wishes. His actions are not only unethical, but illegal. Her tone, calm but imbued with an unshakable resolve, painted a picture far clearer than anything she had said before. She wasn't just defending her home, she was taking control of the narrative. She wasn't allowing Mark to write the story anymore. She was the author now. There will be no further access to my estate by Mark Grant or Laura Grant. Both are hereby excluded from any claim to inheritance, in accordance with the changes I have made to my will, which has already been notarized and filed. I, Evelyn M. Grant, stand firm in my decision, and this video serves as documentation of my intention to sever ties completely. Donna stepped forward, positioning herself beside the desk. She watched Evelyn closely but said nothing, only nodding in silent agreement. Evelyn took another breath, a final pause, before continuing. Let this video serve as a record of my intent and my wishes. I will not allow anyone to take what I've spent my life building, and I will not allow my legacy to be stolen by greed or entitlement. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. The silence stretched out, thick and final. Evelyn turned her gaze away from the camera for a moment, looking directly at Donna. The will has been rewritten, the future secured. No one will take what I've earned, not even from the grave. Donna took a step forward, her face hardening with the same fire that burned in Evelyn's heart. She held out a thick folder with the official notarized copies, her fingers brushing against the documents with a steady determination. Everything's in order, she said, her voice almost a whisper. But we're not done yet. Not by a long shot, Evelyn nodded, her lips curling into a tight smile, one full of quiet satisfaction, but also something darker. No, we're just getting started behind them. The sound of footsteps on the floor above echoed through the house, a creak of the old floorboards. And then a faint buzz from Evelyn's phone. She had muted it, but it still vibrated. She reached for it, almost absently, and glanced at the screen. A message from an unknown number. I hope you're ready for the fight of your life. Evelyn stared at the screen, her grip tightening on the phone. For the first time in days, she allowed a small smirk to play at the corners of her mouth. It was Mark, and he had no idea what was coming next. The morning sun slanted through the courthouse windows, casting sharp, jagged shadows on the marble floors. The courthouse was stark, filled with the hum of whispered conversations and the shuffle of papers. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a quiet kind of anticipation hanging in the air. Evelyn walked through the halls, her cane clicking with each measured step. The steady rhythm of the tap echoed in the quiet, cutting through the silence like a heartbeat. She held her head high, the weight of everything she had fought for resting heavily on her shoulders, but she carried it with dignity. There was no fear in her now, only purpose. Howard was at her side, his presence steady and unflinching. They had been through worse, but this was different. This wasn't just about inheritance or a will. This was about her ability to stand tall and show the world that she was not to be underestimated. Not now, not ever. Mark and Laura were already in the courtroom, seated across from one another, both with the kind of expressions that showed they thought they were on the verge of victory. Mark's hands were clenched tightly on the table, his knuckles pale. Laura sat back in her chair, arms crossed, but her eyes darted toward Evelyn with a sharp, calculating gaze. The clerk at the desk called for order, and the judge, Judge Carol Simmons, entered, her robes swishing with the quiet authority that commanded the room's attention. She had no patience for theatrics, her gaze piercing as she took her seat and surveyed the crowd. Let's get this over with, she said, her voice cool and clipped. Evelyn's heart beat steadily in her chest as she took her seat, the final act of this long play about to unfold. The motion was simple. Mark had requested a formal cognitive evaluation of Evelyn's ability to manage her estate, claiming that her recent decisions regarding the will and estate management were questionable, citing her age and recent actions as signs of diminished capacity. The court had agreed to the request, and now Evelyn would have to prove that she was still of sound mind. Howard stood beside her as the evaluator entered the room, a young woman in a sharp suit, carrying a clipboard and a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She adjusted her glasses as she approached Evelyn. "I've been instructed to conduct a cognitive evaluation of Ms. Grant," the evaluator said, her tone clinical and detached. "If you'll follow me, Ms. Grant." Evelyn nodded once, standing tall as she moved toward the back of the courtroom to a small side room for the evaluation. The door clicked shut behind her, and she was asked a series of questions, simple at first about current events, dates, and names. Evelyn answered quickly, her mind sharp, not missing a beat. The evaluator raised an eyebrow at her responses. "Impressive," she murmured, writing something on her clipboard. "Let's proceed with a few more complex questions." Evelyn answered each one with confidence, the clarity of her mind obvious with every word. She had lived a life full of purpose and had sharpened her intellect over decades of teaching, reading, and thought. The evaluator was beginning to look more uncomfortable with each passing minute. The questions were designed to poke and prod, to find cracks, but Evelyn's mind was as steady as ever. After what felt like hours, the evaluator finally stood up, sighing. "Thank you, Miss Grant. I think we're finished here." Evelyn smiled slightly, knowing the result before the evaluator even left the room. She wasn't just competent, she was sharp. She had always been sharp. Back in the courtroom, Judge Simmons was already reviewing the file, her eyes skimming through the report, clearly unimpressed. Mark sat on the edge of his seat, hands still clenched, watching Evelyn like a hawk. Howard stood to present the affidavit, prepared with the details of the evaluation and the report that would show the court that Evelyn was, in fact, more than capable of managing her estate. The room held its breath as the affidavit was read. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his jaw was set. He knew this wasn't going to go the way he hoped. The court saw through the thin veil of his accusations. "Your Honor," Howard said, his voice firm, "this report should make clear that Evelyn Grant is fully competent to manage her own affairs. The claims of her son, Mark Grant, are baseless." Judge Simmons glanced over the report, her gaze flicking to Mark. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding. "This borders on abuse of process, Mr. Grant. I suggest you proceed with more credible claims next time." The room was silent for a beat, and then Mark stood, his fists clenched at his sides. His face was red with frustration, his eyes flashing with something darker, something more dangerous. But he said nothing. He couldn't. The judge had already spoken. Evelyn remained calm, her posture as unshaken as ever. She met Mark's gaze with a quiet, knowing smile. The battle wasn't over, but today it was hers. As the judge continued speaking, Evelyn rose from her chair, her cane tapping gently against the floor. She left the courtroom with her head held high, her footsteps steady, unwavering. Outside, the courthouse doors opened, and the sunlight hit her face. But as she stepped into the bright light, a new message pinged on her phone. She glanced down, and her heart skipped a beat. "You think you've won, Evelyn?" "You haven't even seen the worst of it." She didn't flinch. Mark had made a mistake. He thought he had her on the ropes. Now, she had him right where she wanted him. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. The sun streamed through the window, casting a warm, golden light across the room. But her mind was elsewhere. Her fingers lightly traced the rim of the cup, the subtle tremor from the stress of the last few weeks lingering in her joints. She could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet before the storm, as if everything in her life had been leading to this. The storm wasn't Mark, though. It was Laura. Laura had done more than challenge her directly. She'd whispered poison into the ears of the people Evelyn had known her whole life. The grocery store, the bank, the bridge club. Evelyn had learned from a neighbor that Laura had spread rumors like wildfire, that Evelyn was losing her mind. that her will was a product of delusion, and that she was too old to make sound decisions. Evelyn hadn't reacted at first, hadn't let herself be consumed by the falsehoods. She knew this was coming, Mark's calculated moves, his desire to claim what wasn't his. But to use Laura like this, to poison the community, to make Evelyn out to be some fragile, broken old woman, it wasn't just underhanded, it was beneath them, and she wouldn't let it stand. Donna, however, was less inclined to stay quiet. Every whisper she caught, every sideways glance she saw in the market or the local bakery, was met with a sharp vocal correction. She was Evelyn's witness and her friend, and she had no tolerance for the rumors that were starting to take root. Evelyn had just finished reading the latest local paper when Donna came storming through the front door, her face flushed with indignation. "Someone has to stop this," Donna said, her voice rising as she entered the kitchen. She was holding a flyer from the local coffee shop, where the rumors had begun to settle like a thick fog. "This is getting ridiculous. Everyone's talking about it. You have to do something." Evelyn remained calm, her fingers resting lightly on the teacup. "I'm documenting everything. Let them whisper. They can't undo what's already been written." Donna shook her head, frustrated. "You don't get it, Evelyn. They're saying you're losing it. They're trying to turn everyone against you, to make it look like you're not fit to manage your own life. That's not just rumors, it's defamation. If they're successful, they'll chip away at everything you've worked for." "It's already starting." Evelyn didn't respond immediately. Instead, she got up, walked over to a drawer, and pulled out her legal pad. With slow, deliberate movements, she began writing. "I'll have Howard file the papers," she said, her voice smooth, calm, and calculating. "This will be settled in court. Let them spread their dirt. It's time they realize they can't bury me with lies." Later that day, Evelyn stood in front of the grocery store, watching the local patrons filter in and out. She saw several of the people who had once called her friend, now offering her nothing more than cool glances and hurried steps. The whispers were louder now, but she held her head high, the echo of her cane tapping against the pavement. Inside, she scanned the aisles with a calm determination, picking up a few things she didn't need. And then, there it was. Marilyn, one of her old book club members, standing in the produce section. Her face flushed as she caught Evelyn's eye. "Evelyn," Marilyn said, her voice far too bright. "You're looking, well." Evelyn smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't wait for Marilyn to ask, didn't let her stand there with the poorly disguised curiosity. Instead, she leaned in, her voice low, smooth, yet tinged with the steel of her resolve. "I hear there's been some talk. People think I'm losing my mind." Marilyn's face shifted, a tightness forming around her jaw. I'm sure it's just misunderstanding. People talk. You know how it is." "No, I don't," Evelyn said, her voice hardening. "But I know this. Nothing spreads like a lie. So if you hear anything else about me, Marilyn, you can set the record straight." The woman blinked, clearly uncomfortable. No need to explain," Evelyn interrupted. "But I will tell you this. I'm not losing anything. Not my mind and not my dignity. And neither should you." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Marilyn frozen in place, her cheeks burning. By the time Evelyn returned home, the first draft of Howard's defamation countersuit was waiting on the kitchen table. She looked over the document, her heart calm, her mind sharp. Mark, Laura, and their web of deceit. This was just the beginning of the unraveling, and the community that had once whispered behind her back would soon be forced to see the truth. The next morning, the phone rang, the call coming from the local press. They had heard the stories, the rumors, and now they wanted to hear from her directly. They were ready to paint the narrative how she saw fit. But before Evelyn could answer, a loud knock at the door echoed through the house. She stood, her back straight, and walked slowly to the door, her hand steady as she grasped the knob. When she opened it, standing in the doorway was Marilyn, her expression no longer uncomfortable, but filled with a kind of apology. "I'm sorry," Marilyn said quietly. "I didn't know it was that serious." I've been telling people what I heard, and now I know it was wrong. Can you forgive me?" Evelyn didn't say anything at first. Her eyes scanned the woman's face, watching the genuine remorse in her eyes. Slowly, a smile crept onto Evelyn's lips. "I believe," Evelyn said softly, "that actions speak louder than words." Marilyn nodded, stepping back, understanding the message loud and clear. Evelyn closed the door gently, the echo of her own heartbeat filling the space. The whispers were starting to die down. The truth was rising to the surface, and it was just a matter of time before Mark and Laura would have to face the consequences of their lies. The pawnshop was cramped, stale with the scent of old electronics and musty velvet-lined cases. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a clinical wash over the mismatched shelves. Jewelry, watches, and forgotten trinkets glinted under scratched glass, as if they were trying to scream their stories through the dust. Evelyn stood near the door, unmoving, her cane planted like a staff beside her. Her mouth was a tight line, her eyes sharp, fixed on the man behind the counter. Howard stood beside her, arms crossed, flanked by a uniformed officer whose badge glinted in the dull light. The clerk, a wiry man with a twitchy mustache and nicotine-stained fingers, shuffled awkwardly behind the register. "Look, I didn't know it was stolen. That's not on me." Howard's voice was firm, calm, and deadly. "No one said it was, yet. Just show us what was brought in." The man grumbled under his breath, but unlocked a cabinet behind the counter. He knelt, fumbling through drawers, until he pulled out a velvet-lined tray and placed it gently on the glass. Evelyn stepped forward, cane tapping against the chipped linoleum. There it was, her late husband's pocket watch, an heirloom passed down from his grandfather, engraved on the back, "For time well spent," and next to it, her silver flatware set, sterling, hand-engraved, a wedding gift from 1968. Her breath hitched. The officer stepped in. "You're certain these are yours, ma'am?" "I'd know that watch blindfolded," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "And those spoons have served 4 generations of Thanksgiving dinners." "Yes, I'm certain." Howard pulled out a document, the original appraisal for the silver set and the inventory list from her estate binder. "Documented, registered, insured. Every item accounted for until now." The officer nodded, already calling for backup to log evidence. The pawnshop clerk raised his hands. "Hey, don't drag me into this. A guy came in a few days ago, said he was cleaning out his mother's house." Howard didn't miss a beat. "Did he use a name?" The man hesitated. Then, "Mark Grant." Said it like he was doing her a favor. Evelyn's lips pressed into a line so thin it could have sliced steel. The officer stepped back and spoke into his radio, the words, "confirmed theft," and "evidence seized," crisp and efficient. Evelyn didn't look at the items again. She didn't need to. The courtroom was silent, almost reverent, like a church before a funeral. Judge Simmons flipped through the new paperwork Howard had filed. Her mouth curled with something between disgust and disbelief. "Selling family heirlooms behind your mother's back," she muttered. "Disgraceful." Mark sat stiffly beside Laura, his face pale, his jaw twitching. He didn't speak. Laura looked like she'd been carved out of marble, cold, beautiful, and immovable. But there was something in her eyes now, something unsettled. This wasn't part of the plan. Howard stood, calm and composed as ever. "Your Honor, the watch and silver were found at a local pawnshop, verified through estate documentation, and matched to Mr. Grant's signature on the intake form." Simmons turned to Mark, her eyes like daggers. "You care to explain why you're liquidating property you don't own?" Mark opened his mouth, but the words came out hollow. I thought she didn't want those things anymore. She's been clearing out the house." "She's been clearing you out, Mr. Grant," Simmons snapped. "And you keep giving her reasons." The gallery stirred with low murmurs. A few familiar faces from Evelyn's neighborhood were in attendance. She could feel the tide turning. No more whispers, only judgment. Simmons banged the gavel once. "Charges for theft and misrepresentation are being reviewed by the district attorney. Until then, Mr. Grant is barred from any further physical access to the Grant estate, effective immediately. Evelyn sat quietly as the gavel echoed through the courtroom. She didn't gloat, she didn't even smile, but Donna, seated a row behind her, leaned forward and whispered, "You've taken the first brick out of his little house of lies." Evelyn nodded once, never taking her eyes off Mark. He couldn't meet her gaze. That evening, back at her home, Evelyn opened the drawer where the watch and silver had always belonged. Empty no more, the past had returned. But the future? That was what she was building now. She stood at the window, staring out across the lawn as dusk fell over Richmond. The porch lights flicked on. A car idled at the end of the driveway, a black sedan. She narrowed her eyes. Laura stepped out of the passenger side. Alone. And she wasn't heading for the front door. She was heading for the garage. Evelyn turned sharply, calling for Donna from the hallway. Because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be quiet. Evelyn stood in the doorway of the garage, staring at Laura like she was seeing a burglar in pearls. Laura froze mid-step, one hand still on the keypad beside the locked cabinets, where Evelyn kept the deed archives and donation receipts, none of which had ever been shared with Mark or her. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. Not alone. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Looking for something?" Laura straightened slowly, smoothing a strand of hair behind her ear as if they'd run into each other at brunch. "I was just checking if any of the donation records were misplaced." Mark thought. "I'm sure he did." Evelyn's voice was razor sharp. "You can leave now." Laura's eyes flickered to the locked drawers, then back to Evelyn. "You know, most people your age don't think clearly when they're under pressure. That kind of paranoia, it's dangerous. For you, for your legacy." Evelyn didn't blink. "If you knew anything about legacy, Laura, you wouldn't be standing in my garage like a thief in a cardigan." Laura's face flushed. "This is vindictive." Evelyn stepped forward, closing the space between them with the quiet command of a queen reclaiming her throne. "No, it's meticulous. And that's why you're scared." She didn't wait for Laura's response, just turned her back, cane tapping against the floor with every deliberate step, and walked out. By noon the next day, Howard had returned to the house, the fresh legal draft open on the dining table like a surgical tool. "This addendum," he said, adjusting his glasses, "formally reallocates what used to be discretionary funds, liquid assets, property value overflow, and unused endowments. We're tying every dollar to something real. Public, traceable." Evelyn nodded. "Scholarships, library programs, new teacher residencies. I want every cent marked by intention." "And not a cent," Howard added, "that can be clawed back by Mark or Laura. It's airtight. Public filings, county confirmation, foundation transparency." Donna leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "He's bleeding reputation faster than money now. That courtroom footage made the rounds online. Everyone saw the heirlooms." Howard clicked his pen. "They'll see this too. I'm submitting a public notice to the probate clerk's office once this is signed." Evelyn took the pen and lowered herself into her seat, slow but unshaken. The moment was heavy, not with hesitation but with precision. She scanned the language again, her eyes pausing on the words irrevocable donation clause. Every word was a knife Mark would never see coming. She signed her name, once, twice, a third time on the last page, beside the notary line. Howard sealed the documents into a protective sleeve, like one might seal away evidence at a crime scene. "That's it," he said. "They're officially excluded, permanently, legally, publicly." Evelyn reached for her tea but didn't sip it. "Let them accuse me of cruelty. They built this prison with their own hands. I just locked the door behind them." The notice went live on the county clerk's site by 3:47 p.m. By 4:12, the local press picked it up. By 5 Mao, it was being shared in the neighborhood's Facebook group. Grant Estate Redirection, no family beneficiaries named. The post beneath the article was simple, written by a neighbor Evelyn hadn't spoken to in months. Guess she really meant it. That evening, Evelyn stepped out onto her porch just as the last light of day began to fade. The air was crisp, fall creeping closer. Donna joined her, holding 2 glasses of wine. Do you feel lighter? Donna asked, handing one over. No, Evelyn replied, gazing out across her quiet lawn, but I feel sharper. From the sidewalk, two teenagers walked by. Nodding politely as they passed, Evelyn nodded back. They'd been recipients of her husband's early science grant 10 years ago. Now they were college-bound. That was legacy. But the moment shattered when a car screeched to a halt in front of the house. Laura climbed out, again alone. No pearls, no calm, just rage. She stomped to the edge of the lawn, holding a manila envelope in one hand. You want a war? She shouted. You just got one. Evelyn didn't rise from her chair. She simply set her wine down and folded her hands in her lap. Then I hope you brought more than paper, she said, coolly. Laura threw the envelope onto the grass and stormed off, heels snapping. Donna picked up the envelope, her brow furrowed as she opened it. Inside, photographs, color, dated, time-stamped. A nod of Evelyn, of Howard, at a restaurant, with someone Evelyn hadn't seen in years. The voice on the voicemail was low, breathy, and unmistakably furious. You're going to regret this, Evelyn. All of it. You think this ends with your little papers and your smug little smile. You'll choke on your legacy. The line went dead. Evelyn stood in her study, phone in hand, the silence that followed somehow louder than the words themselves. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in sharp stripes across her desk. Donna stood behind her, stone-faced, arms crossed. Neither of them had spoken for a full minute. Evelyn turned slowly and set the phone on the desk between them. That wasn't Mark, she said. Donna's eyebrows lifted slightly. No, that voice had lipstick on it. Howard arrived within the hour, already buttoning his coat before he even stepped into the foyer. His tone was brisk, but beneath it was a sharp edge of fury. You saved the recording? He asked as he set his briefcase down. Of course, Evelyn said, and I've already emailed it to 3 different drives. Just in case something happens to my phone between here and court. Howard offered a tight smile. You've officially become my favorite client. By 3 p.m., they were standing in front of Judge Simmons once again. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Word had spread that this wasn't just about a will or a family spat anymore. This was starting to smell like something darker. Laura sat alone at the defense table. Her perfectly coiffed hair was pulled tighter than usual, her expression brittle, as if one more hard word might shatter her entirely. Mark was absent, his seat glaringly empty. Evelyn sat calm, composed, her cane resting against her chair like an extension of her spine. Howard stood. Your Honor, we'd like to enter a new piece of evidence into the record. A voicemail left on Ms. Grant's personal phone at 2:03 a.m. this morning. The voice belongs to Laura Grant, and the content qualifies as both a veiled threat and an attempt at intimidation. Judge Simmons held up a hand. Play it. Howard did. The courtroom fell silent as Laura's voice filled the space. Low, venomous, unmistakably hers. When it ended, Simmons leaned back in her chair slowly. Her silence was deliberate, heavy. She let it settle like dust after an explosion. Then, Mrs. Grant, you've crossed the line. Laura opened her mouth to speak, but the judge didn't give her the chance. This court will not be used as a stage for petty vengeance, and I will not tolerate psychological games meant to coerce or intimidate an opposing party. If there is one more instance of harassment, verbal, physical, digital, I will hold you in contempt and remand you on the spot. Laura's face flushed a violent red. She stood abruptly. This entire hearing is a circus. She's manipulated the will, the town, the press. Judge Simmons banged her gavel. That's enough. Howard folded his hands. Evelyn didn't move. Laura looked around, perhaps expecting someone to come to her defense. No one did. Slowly, stiffly, she gathered her things, shoved them into her designer bag, and stormed out of the courtroom without looking back. The door clicked shut behind her like the closing of a vault. Outside the courthouse, Donna exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all week. The cracks are showing, she murmured. They've been there a while, Evelyn said, adjusting her coat. She just finally heard one splinter. That evening, Evelyn stood in the attic of her home, the late sun washing the old floorboards in soft gold. Dust danced in the light like ash. She was surrounded by boxes, books, handwritten lesson plans, Old student thank you cards, shelves of worn classics, her husband's library, his pride and joy. He'd taught English literature for 36 years, built this collection one rare edition at a time. She ran her fingers across the spines. He would have hated seeing them in this mess, she said quietly. Donna, carrying a clipboard and camera to catalog the collection for donation, smiled gently. He'd be proud you didn't let it rot with the wrong people. Evelyn nodded, turning to a large banker's box labeled for transfer. These go to the Jefferson Public School District. They're building a new library wing. She placed the final book, a first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, on top of the pile. They'll make better use of it than Mark ever would have. Later that night, Evelyn stepped out onto her back porch, wrapped in her shawl, the air crisp with coming fall. Crickets whispered in the hedges. The moon hung low, pale and watchful. Donna joined her, handing her a manila folder. It's official, she said. Laura filed notice. She's withdrawn from the hearings, entirely. Evelyn took the folder, flipped it open, then she paused, because tucked behind the court paperwork was a note, typed, short. He's going to lose everything, and he's going to blame you for it. I won't be there to stop him next time. Evelyn lowered the paper slowly, her jaw tightening, because Laura was out, and that meant Mark was going to get desperate. The courthouse was full before the hour struck 9. Every pew creaked under the weight of curious neighbors, whispered alliances, and people who had once politely smiled at Evelyn in grocery store aisles, but now leaned forward, hungry for the fall or the victory. Phones were tucked into coat pockets, texts already flying through group chats. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore, it was spectacle. Evelyn entered slowly, escorted by Howard and Donna, her cane tapping steadily against the marble floor. She wore navy wool, sharp lines, understated pearls, not a widow's uniform, but a commander's. Howard carried a thick folder, the culmination of weeks of work, labeled in tidy black print. Grant v. Grant, fraud, misrepresentation, intimidation, theft. On the defense bench, Mark sat alone. No Laura, no lawyer, just him, his tie askew, a faint sheen of sweat above his brow. He shifted restlessly, his jaw grinding like a man chewing glass. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Simmons entered with her usual grace, wrapped in iron. This hearing, she began, is to determine the validity of claims made by Mark Grant on the Grant estate, following multiple filings from both parties, and to assess supporting evidence of misconduct. Her gaze drifted to Mark, and stayed there a second longer than necessary. Mr. Blake, she nodded toward Howard. Proceed. Howard stood. The court has received, via affidavit, subpoena, and direct witness testimony, proof that Mr. Grant knowingly attempted to defraud his mother, Evelyn Grant, through forged documentation, asset misrepresentation, and unlawful liquidation of personal property. Additionally, Howard paused, flipping a page. We present a record of intimidation and threats delivered through associates of Mr. Grant, now corroborated through voicemail and court-certified analysis. Murmurs rolled through the gallery like a gust of wind. Exhibit A, he said, holding up the watch. Exhibit B, affidavit from the pawn shop, with Mr. Grant's signature. Exhibit C, voicemail transcript. Exhibit D, record of attempted loans secured against estate assets still under legal ownership by Ms. Grant. He stepped back. Your Honor, the question isn't whether misconduct occurred. It's how far Mr. Grant was willing to go before the court said enough. Judge Simmons nodded once. Call your witness. Evelyn rose, and for a brief moment, as she crossed the courtroom floor, everything else fell silent. She took the stand without hesitation. State your name for the record. Evelyn Margaret Grant. And your relationship to Mr. Grant. He's my son. The court reporter's fingers clicked steadily. Howard stepped forward. Mrs. Grant, can you describe briefly your state of mind over the last 6 months in regard to your estate? Evelyn's voice was calm, clear, like she was back in the classroom delivering a final lecture. I've been focused, not vindictive. I reviewed my will, protected my assets, and took action when my intentions were misrepresented. I did what any capable woman would do in the face of exploitation. I documented, I defended. I endured. And were you pressured? Evelyn shook her head. No one pressured me, but someone certainly tried to intimidate me. She glanced briefly at Mark. He looked away. Howard turned to the judge. No further questions. Mark suddenly stood, slamming his palms on the defense table. She's lying. She's always been dramatic. Sit down, Judge Simmons barked, banging the gavel. He didn't. She twisted everything. You think she's so noble, but she's cutting her family out for strangers. She wanted me gone long before this. Simmons's voice dropped. Deadly quiet. Mr. Grant, another outburst, and I will have you removed. Mark sat, violently, slumping back like a deflated balloon. His mouth opened again, but no sound came out. The judgment took less than 10 minutes. The gallery held its breath. Effective immediately, Judge Simmons began. Mr. Mark Grant is barred from all claims to the Grant estate. He is to repay the assessed value of liquidated assets, including heirlooms and attempted fraudulent gains. He is hereby excluded from all inheritance and is prohibited from further contest under penalty of contempt. The gavel hit once. Final. Concrete. Mark didn't move. Evelyn exhaled softly, not in relief but in completion. Donna squeezed her shoulder as the room began to buzz again. They didn't stay for the reporters outside. That evening, Evelyn sat in her husband's old study, the judgment order now framed on the wall, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what it took, of what she had withstood. She opened the drawer beside her and removed a single envelope. It had Mark's name on it. Inside, a copy of the judge's ruling, and a handwritten note. You thought this was war. It was survival. I chose the right heir. Me. Mother. She sealed it quietly and handed it to the courier, because even now, even after everything, she would let him read it in silence, but not before the world already knew. The door slammed hard enough to shake the picture frames on the wall. Laura's heels clicked once across the tile, sharp, final, before they stopped completely. Mark sat on the edge of the couch, still wearing the same wrinkled suit from court, his tie loose, the collar damp with sweat. The living room smelled of stale takeout and tension, the air heavy with everything left unsaid for too long. I stayed through embarrassment, Laura said, through silence, through people whispering my name in cafes like it was a disease. Mark didn't look at her. He just stared at the muted TV screen, the headline still frozen in closed caption across the bottom. Judge rules in favor of Evelyn Grant. Son barred from estate. Laura tossed a folder onto the coffee table. Divorce papers, unfiled, but signed. You lost everything, she said. But what's worse is you dragged me with you. I was loyal. But loyalty doesn't mean staying tethered to a sinking ship. His voice was hoarse. We can fix it. Laura's laugh was hollow. You don't fix character with duct tape, Mark. You inherit it. Or you don't, she grabbed her coat. Enjoy your silence, she said at the door, not even looking back. Then she was gone. And the silence wasn't peaceful. It was accusatory. The apartment he moved into was a 2-room shoebox at the edge of Richmond. Second floor, no elevator, no dishwasher, no central air. He slept on a futon with one broken leg. The fridge made a sound like a dying animal. Paint peeled from the windowsills, the kind of place no one visited. The kind of place you didn't list on Christmas cards. Mark stared at the wall most nights, the court order framed on his mind like a curse. He had no job, no access to funds. The restitution payments would begin next month, deducted from the remnants of a dwindling savings account. And the whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder now that people knew he had no defense. He couldn't go anywhere in town without seeing someone who had sat in that courtroom gallery, watching him squirm. He hadn't seen Laura since she walked out, but Evelyn lingered like a weight under his ribcage. He told himself he hated her. He told himself she ruined everything. But late one night, after scrolling through news articles and neighborhood forums that still speculated about his disgrace, Mark opened his phone and stared at the blank message field. The cursor blinked for a long time. Then he typed, "Can I come home? No greeting. No apology." Just 6 words that felt like a stone dropping into a still lake. Evelyn sat in her study, tea in hand, the house quiet around her. Outside, wind danced through the trees, brushing dry leaves across the porch. Donna sat nearby, cataloging donations for the school district on her laptop. The phone buzzed once. Evelyn glanced at the screen. She didn't flinch. Just one message from a number she still hadn't blocked. "Can I come home?" She stared at it for a beat. Then, without a word, she pressed her thumb against the screen. Delete. She didn't respond, didn't forward it, didn't show it to Donna. She simply let it vanish, because not every cry for help deserved an answer, and not every fall deserved a hand to catch it. Donna, without even looking up, seemed to sense it. Was it him, she asked? Yes. Let me guess, Donna said, tapping another field on the spreadsheet. He's discovering that peace is expensive, Evelyn exhaled, and he can't afford it. They said nothing more for a long time. The house was steady now, humming with restored quiet. No lawyers, no shouting, no threats behind velvet voices, just a woman, her home, her decisions, and her future, untouched. Later, Evelyn stepped onto the back porch, her shawl wrapped tight. Her cane met the wood with a rhythmic tap as she reached the steps. She stood there for a moment, eyes fixed on the stars that had begun to blink through the dusk. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel watched, didn't feel hunted. She only felt rooted. Her past was hers. Her name was hers. And her silence, this silence, finally belonged to her. The Sunday paper hit the porch with a clean, heavy slap. Evelyn bent slowly to pick it up, the morning sun not yet past the tree line, casting long shadows across the walkway. The lawn was still damp, the world still quiet. She could smell earth, fresh coffee, and the faint trace of Donna's cinnamon scones baking next door. She unfolded the paper, the ink still fresh, crisp edges trembling slightly in her hands. Retired teacher defends estate, cuts out entitled son. The headline took up nearly half the front page of the Jefferson Courier. Below it, a full-color photograph of Evelyn standing on her front porch, framed by autumn ivy. Her cane rested at her side. Her spine was straight. Not a victim, not a villain, a force. Inside, she laid the paper flat on the table beside her cane and a neat stack of estate records. Silent symbols of battles won, and ones she'd never needed to fight. Across town, in a dim second-floor apartment that smelled of stale coffee and regret, Mark saw the article on his phone before he could even unlock the screen. The Courier had tagged it on every social platform. He didn't read the full piece. He couldn't, but the headline was enough. His name wasn't even in the title, just a shadow under hers, a footnote. He hadn't gone out in 3 days, not since a neighbor's kid saw him fumbling with the laundry key and said, "Hey, isn't that the guy who stole silverware from his mom?" He hadn't even told his landlord who he really was when he signed the lease. Just M. Carter. He didn't want the questions. Now he avoided windows, avoided grocery stores, avoided mirrors. The internet knew his face. The town knew his name. And Evelyn? She wasn't hiding from anyone. At the house, Howard arrived just past 10. He brought croissants and a leather-bound folder marked Final Recording, Court Copy. "You've locked every door," he rattled, he said, gesturing toward the paper. Evelyn offered him a seat at the breakfast nook. "He'll try another window," she replied, "but there's no oxygen left for him here." Howard flipped open the folder, revealing a notarized copy of the withdrawal order Laura had filed, now stamped and sealed. Beneath it, a final amendment to the estate's protective clause, publicly logged, county-stamped, and visible to any lawyer worth their retainer. Howard tapped it with 2 fingers. He can't claw at this anymore. Not legally, not financially, not even symbolically, Evelyn nodded. "Then it's time," she said. That evening, the living room was filled with warm lamplight and the smell of mulled cider. The women of the book club were gathered around Evelyn's fireplace. The topic had been the House of Mirth, but no one opened their copies. Donna, legs tucked under her on the couch, held up the Courier instead. "Oh, we're reading this tonight," she declared. "Page 2, column 1. Laughter rippled through the room. Evelyn merely sipped her cider, silent, content. Donna cleared her throat and began reading aloud. In a case that has captured the attention of Jefferson County, retired educator Evelyn Grant has become a quiet symbol of resilience and boundary setting. After a series of legal battles, she has successfully defended her estate from her estranged son's fraudulent attempts to claim it. Neighbors have called her dignified, resolute, and the last good example of a generation that knew how to say no. Sources confirm that Ms. Grant has redirected substantial portions of her estate to benefit public education and local scholarships, including donations of rare books and a permanent teaching grant in her late husband's name. When asked for comment, Ms. Grant said only, "Legacy should be earned, not assumed." The room fell silent after the last line. No one clapped. They didn't need to. It wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. Later that night, Evelyn stood alone at the dining room table. The Courier sat beside her cane, folded neatly, marked at the articles page with a silver spoon from the recovered set. She touched the headline once, then reached for a small frame nearby and set it beside the paper. Inside it, a black and white photograph of her and her husband, smiling in front of the library steps, arms around each other. Legacy, real legacy, not what could be stolen, what had been built. Outside, a car idled at the edge of the street, its headlights off. A figure sat in the driver's seat, still, watching the house from behind tinted windows. Not approaching, not leaving, just waiting. But Evelyn never looked out, because some stories are no longer up for negotiation. The kettle sang softly on the stove, its steam curling like a ribbon through the kitchen air. Evelyn moved slowly but with precision, pouring the hot water over the loose-leaf Earl Grey, her favorite, the one with lavender from her garden. The clink of the spoon against porcelain echoed in the quiet, a gentle percussion of life resuming, not rebuilding. Donna sat across the table, sunlight falling across her shoulder like a blessing. Her hands were wrapped around her mug, her eyes thoughtful as they followed Evelyn's every movement. There was no tension, no edge, just the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the antique clock on the wall, marking seconds in a house that no longer belonged to chaos. "I still expect the phone to ring with bad news," Donna murmured, offering a rueful smile. "Guess some habits die harder than others." Evelyn didn't reply right away. She simply inhaled, let the scent of citrus polish and chamomile fill her chest, and exhaled, slow, controlled, grounded. "It won't," she said at last, her voice clear and quiet. "Not anymore." She glanced toward the living room, where every cushion was where it belonged, every frame straight, every drawer shut. No court orders on the counters, no strangers skulking around the perimeter, no clattering shoes down the hallway threatening her calm. The house had stopped holding its breath. So had she. On the table beside them sat a fresh leather folder, stamped with the official seal from the Jefferson County Probate Office. Evelyn picked it up and opened it, her fingers smoothing the top page. Her revised will. She began reading aloud, not theatrically, but as one would read scripture to a trusted friend. "To those I love, I leave more than things. I leave direction, I leave boundaries. I leave the knowledge that peace belongs to those who respect it." Donna blinked slowly, her fingers tightening around the mug. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Evelyn closed the folder gently and set it beside her teacup. That afternoon, across town, a small group of students gathered beneath the banner strung across the Jefferson High Library steps. The Evelyn M. Grant Scholarship Program, the launch day. There were cupcakes and press cameras. and an entire row of science teachers who knew the books they'd received upstairs would outlive them all. The head librarian gave a short speech. She'd been one of Evelyn's students once. She choked up when she said Evelyn's name. The scholarships had already funded 5 full rides to in-state universities. One student's mother whispered to a local reporter, "She could have spent it on a beach house." Instead, she gave my daughter 4 years of freedom that night. Evelyn took her evening walk around the block. She moved slowly, cane tapping the rhythm of a life no longer pursued. Neighbors paused on their porches as she passed, not with pity, not with curiosity, with respect. A man from 2 doors down tipped his hat. A teenager walking his dog nodded and stepped aside to let her pass. None of them spoke, and Evelyn didn't need them to. At home, she returned to the study and set the will beside the old Sunday paper. The headline had faded, but the message hadn't. Legacy should be earned, not assumed. She turned off the lights one by one and made her way to the porch. The sky above was a deep velvet blue, the moon high, the air finally cold enough to warrant a shawl. Donna joined her with a small smile and 2 slices of apple tart wrapped in napkins. They ate in silence, and when the silence settled fully, when even the crickets seemed to give space to the stillness, Evelyn finally spoke. "He grabbed my arm," she said softly, her eyes on the dark beyond the yard, "and demanded I die." Donna turned to look at her. Evelyn's voice didn't waver, so I took away every piece of peace he thought he had. She rested her hand on her cane and exhaled, at last.